Hi, welcome to the More Than Anatomy videocast, where we try and take yoga anatomy to a whole new level. Today, my guest is Jenna Rose Longoria, also known as the Period Guru. She is a board certified functional nutritional practitioner specializing in women's hormones. She was listed by the Huffington Post as one of the top 20 new health writers to follow in 2017. Her work has been featured in Mind Body Green, NBC, The Elephant Journal, SXSW, and she is the author of The Period Solution, 28-Day Hormone Balancing Guide. Through her virtual private practice, Jenna helps women reclaim their hormones and digestive health with a multidisciplinary approach combining functional medicine, nutrition, and diagnostic lab testing in her results-driven root cause program. Jenna is a firm believer that the right diet and lifestyle can put any hormonal condition into remission. So today, Jenna is going to be discussing with me the importance of maintaining a healthy hormonal balance whilst practicing Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga. I've personally met a lot of women over the years who've had menstrual issues whilst practicing Ashtanga, and really that should never happen. Jenna's going to give you lots of ideas on how to avoid that, and I really feel it's going to help you understand your body better and give you a more balanced and healthy living body. So, with that all said and done, let's get started. Hey, Jenna, thank you so much for joining me today. So I was thinking earlier when we met, and my thought was we met about 6 years ago
Mm.
during one of your visits to Mysore to study with Shrat Joyce. Um, can you tell me a little bit about um, your journey to Ashtanga and kind of through it, and what drew you to that particular yoga practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been practicing about, I see at that point, almost 10 years yoga, but vinyasa and just, kind of dabbling in it here and there. And when I was introduced to the Ashtanga practice, I was just hooked. I really liked the routine. And I appreciated the fact of having, as a type A personality, a sequence and just something that I could kind of come home to every day. And so I was hooked, and it was like 6 to 7 months later that I took my first trip to Mysore to practice with Sharat.
Nice. And what was there a particular kind of driving force for you to start
Mm.
yoga in the first place? What brought you to this particular path?
Well, I mean, in the beginning, I practiced yoga because of just really bad back pain. I had a few childhood injuries that left me with, back pain and so originally it was really just for kind of the physical benefits of I noticed that if I practiced yoga, I felt better. And and then, practice yoga, you look better. And I think that was it in the beginning. And then after a few years, I noticed how it made me calmer, have these moments of peace, of inward, going inward. Um, and and then I found the Ashtanga yoga practice, and it kind of just elevated everything more to that mind body connection.
Nice. So often I find with people who work with health or in the healthcare kind
Mm.
of field, and because obviously you're a nutritionist and particularly involved or interested in women's hormonal health,
Mhm.
there is a story behind that. There's a reason why you followed that path, and often it can be quite a personal story of having issues yourself. Would you mind kind of sharing a
Mm.
little bit around what drew you to this
Sure.
particular field?
Yeah, I actually taught yoga before I became a nutritionist. But the fascination with the body and health was just because I was just very unhealthy my whole life. I had a lot of health issues. I have something called polycystic ovarian syndrome, known as PCOS, which is a hormone kind of, it's a metabolic disorder, really. Endometriosis, which affects 1 in 10 women, and it causes someone to have very, painful periods, and not just periods, but during the whole month, you can have pelvic pain, intense pelvic pain, and inflammation in the body. And so, um, you know, I was always fascinated. I know I learned over the years that certain foods affected how I felt. I felt better when I ate certain foods and avoided other foods. And then I found the yoga practice, which just brought so much peace because I had a lot of anxiety, which actually there is a component with these hormone issues and anxiety. Actually, and yeah, and so the yoga practice just brought me into my body. It allowed me to kind of have the silence to listen to the signs that my body was giving me. Whereas I feel a lot of us just kind of run around every day and we never really listen to the sensations our bodies are giving us. And whatever yoga practice that you do have, whether it be Ashtanga or any other type of yoga practice, it's just getting you into the present moment. And so it is strengthening that line of communication with your body. And so I credit the yoga practice for leading me onto the path to become a nutritionist and to work with hormones and to honor the cyclical rhythm that women have, which is about a 28-day-ish cycle, this hormone rhythm. And, our dietary needs, our lifestyle needs, our exercise needs ebb and flow depending on what phase of the menstrual cycle we're in.
Okay. So during your kind of journey through
Mhm.
the yoga practice, and particularly with Ashtanga, have you found that the asana themselves or the awareness of your body has been the key component in your healing? Has it been the asana bringing
Mm.
strength to your body or flexibility, or the awareness that it's brought of how your body is, the rhythm of your body, how your body is working, being more conscious?
Yeah, I definitely think it's getting on the mat every day and having that connection with the body and the breath, not a perfect kapotasana or catching your heels or your knees and Urdhva Dhanurasana. So um, I don't believe in perfection in the anatomy. I believe it's really just synchronizing the body with the breath and and just being in the present moment, and yoga is a somatic practice. You're getting into the body. So we're releasing any stored emotions or, integrating any of these emotions and traumas that have happened in the past from our, anything we've downloaded, in our software in our brain, right? There's so much that humans don't integrate. And so the yoga practice allows us to integrate that, which is profound.
Sure, sure. So with the kind
Mm,
of transition of your health through the yoga practice and through Ashtanga,
mhm.
how have you made it work for you in terms of, have you had to adapt the practice a little bit to your own specific needs? Have you had to change the way that some people say that it should be practiced, for example?
Yeah,
Have you
absolutely.
modified the postures or eaten differently, for example?
I have, yeah, I have a lot during the year through in the last few years, really. The first few years of the Ashtanga practice, especially going to Mysore, my health actually suffered because I was part of that culture where we don't talk about it enough, but there are a lot of eating disorders in Mysore. There are a lot of we just kind of turn a blind eye. We don't look at it. We don't think about it, and because it's also become so normalized because we practice on an empty stomach, which is wise, but um, I feel like anyone eating past a certain time is looked at strangely, like, oh my gosh, they're eating dinner at 5 p.m. Like eating food after two. It's like I remember one time there was a quite a advanced yoga practitioner and teacher, a senior teacher, and I'm not going to say their name. It was in Mysore. He was eating dinner at like 5 p.m. and we were all there at the Depth and Green, which anyone who's been to Mysore knows Depth and Green. And he was like, "I'm so," and he was justifying. He was like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I'm eating dinner. I just didn't eat, earlier." And I just looked at him and I said, "You should never apologize for eating and fueling your practice." Yeah, in front of everyone because I was just like, this is the culture. And then you have this, a senior practitioner, teacher, one of the, it's like we look at food as it's taboo, and My health suffered because my first year I had the late practice time. So I was practicing at 9:30 in the morning on my first year, as you generally do on your first year. And so I was still getting up at like 4:30 in the morning, having my coffee, no prana, and then practicing at 9:30. So having no food, nothing but coffee, doing this intense practice, which, we're all athletes as Ashtanga yoga practitioners. I know we don't look at it like that because it's a spiritual practice and we look at it as like a spiritual prayer, but it is an athletic practice. And my hormones and adrenals really suffered those first few years a lot. And until I adapted a little bit, and then as I began teaching and coming back, and I was teaching in the Mysore program in Houston. So I was getting up at like 3 in the morning, going to the shala, practicing from 4 to 6, then teaching from 6 to 9, all without food. And my body really suffered for that. And that's something that we just see. We see most teachers, they don't eat. I think things are maybe changing now. It's almost looked at as a badge of honor who can go the longest without eating food in a day. It's like who can be, maybe it makes you more spiritual, but it's very important to eat to fuel your practice, especially for women. We don't do as well with these intermittent fasts, these long intermittent fasts as men do. All of the research is done on men. And yeah, the keto diet, intermittent fasting works really well for men, boost their testosterone levels, muscle growth. But for women, it can be very detrimental for our steroid hormones, our fertility hormones, can lower them. It can increase stress hormones. It can be catabolic on the body, break down muscle. Um, and so it really is not the best thing for us to go such long periods without eating,
So
especially when you add coffee first thing in the morning, which is also raises your cortisol and your stress hormones.
exactly. So what did you change? Did you eat a little bit or drink something like some kind of a power drink or something before practice or immediately after practice? What did you change to make it work for you and create better balance
Um,
in your body?
so I began adding ghee to my coffee in the morning, um, and coconut oil, and blending it. And so having it like what you might know as bulletproof coffee. It's gotten a famous name, bulletproof, but it doesn't have to be like a bulletproof brand. It's really just adding fat to your coffee, and adding those healthy fats really nourish our metabolism, and they give us enough calories just to kind of tell our body that, hey, everything is okay.
Mm,
And eventually I actually switched to cacao instead of coffee because I found the caffeine was too stimulating and I didn't need that, especially while fasting. And everyone's different. And some people can do coffee, some people may be better with matcha or cacao, caffeine free. But I found adding the fats really helps me fuel my practice. And then for after I finished practicing and before I taught, I brought a protein shake, and nothing too filling, just something protein with water, even just to get 20 to 30 grams of protein in my body to help refuel, to get those amino acids to help with recovery, especially because teaching also you're using your bandhas, you're using your body. It's not just like you're talking when you're teaching in a Mysore program. It requires strength and
totally,
energy.
totally. I mean, it reminds me of something my teacher Sri O.P. Tiwari, based in Lonavala in India, and he is a big fan of ghee. And when he started suggesting that I added ghee to my diet, and not that I was practicing Ashtanga, then I used to practice Ashtanga, as you know, but mostly to support my pranayama practice, it changed all of my food cravings. Before, I'd always go through food cravings because I wasn't getting enough calories. And
Mhm.
also, I probably wasn't having enough fat within the diet to absorb a lot of the fat soluble vitamins. So having that fat is, or some kind of fat, with the ghee, if you're a vegan, or olive oil or
Absolutely.
coconut oil, into the diet, it can be really, really important, and it can turn things around a lot. It certainly dramatically turned things around for me, and it sounds like it did for you as well.
Mm. Especially, yeah, I agree because I mean we need cholesterol, we need saturated fats for formation of steroid hormones. So if we don't have enough healthy fats, then we're not going to make enough of those sex hormones like progesterone, testosterone, estrogen. And not to mention cholesterol, creates the membrane of each and every cell in our body. So it's really important.
Totally. So did you make any other modifications? Did you take extra days off during the month? Did you go to bed straight after, finishing your practice and teaching to give the body more rest? What other modifications might you have done?
Yeah, I always respected taking off the first 2 to 3 days of my menstrual cycle. And that's one thing I really credit, Shrat does a great job of emphasizing the importance of that. Um, Whether people listen to that or not in my story is another story. I know everyone has a different opinion. Like maybe they think I'm a woman, I can do everything a man can do. I can do that slogan, I can do anything you can do bleeding, which really irks me because it's like, yeah, we can, but why would you want to? Our bodies are doing a lot behind the scenes when we're menstruating. So the whole month, our bodies are building this endometrial lining. Like it's basically creating this organ, and it's shedding that at the end of the month, and we lose so much iron and minerals, and there's just so much going on. Your liver is working hard to produce all the blood and to filter out all of the toxins, and so adding in all these twists and inversions in this heated practice is not a good idea to when our body is going through all of that. It's just counterintuitive. And either, I would love, there's this quote from Dr. Geeta Iyengar, um, and she said, a healthy menstruation is a significant indication of a healthy state of body and mind. We have to respect our womanhood. We have to respect our bodies, which have got this very important function to perform. Obviously, we need to adjust our practice. If we do not respect this fact, then we are disrespecting our own existence as well as that of the future generation.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Mm,
Um, it's really, really profound words, really. Around often we see within the Ashtanga community, and as you know, I lived in Mysore for many years, and being a chiropractor and having a
mm,
clinic there, I saw many female Ashtanga practitioners, and I was always kind of shocked and never ceased to be surprised the amount of practitioners that would say that they didn't have a monthly cycle anymore, that the practice
mhm,
had essentially stopped their cycle. And I really want to stress that not so much the practice had stopped it, but the way they were practicing, perhaps.
mhm, mhm.
Because I'm a big believer that the yoga is never wrong, only the application of it can be. So when hormonal imbalances start, it's just the way we're applying it to the student that we're with or to ourselves. So there's that culture that exists, and many of the people I work with, they would say that no, I don't have a cycle, but that's normal. There was an underground community almost talking about this, saying
Mhm,
that if you practice correctly, your cycle stops, which,
mhm.
you know, for me is completely incorrect. And I would love to hear your thoughts around this.
Yeah. So first of all, for every year we don't menstruate, and it's really about ovulation. Ovulation is the most important, and it's really the most important event. For every year that we don't ovulate, we lose 1% bone mass. That is significant. So if you stop menstruating at 25 and think about how many years you don't menstruate, how much bone mass you're losing, especially if you're an Ashtanga practitioner, you understand the importance of bone mass. And in order to do the practice, you need that. Women are more prone to osteoporosis in later years, especially after menopause when we don't make enough as much estrogen. So every month we ovulate is like depositing health chips into our health savings account. And so I think that's why a lot of women, they think, oh, well, it's just a period. What's the issue? It's actually easier for me. I don't have to worry about a period every month, and I don't have to take off practice anymore. And it's almost seen as a badge of honor amongst some women. And I see this changing in the Ashtanga yoga community where people are talking about it. Um, but it is important because the first thing that will go off, that will change in a woman's body when there is an imbalance in the body, is her menstrual cycle. It'll disappear, it'll become irregular. So it is a fifth vital sign, and it is a barometer of our overall health, like a report card every month if how we're living is in harmony with what our body needs. So yeah, we need to be menstruating, and it is a concern. It's not normal to lose our period. If you're practicing and if you're practicing correctly, I agree with you. If you're practicing correctly for your body, then you will not lose your menstrual cycle.
I'm glad you raised that point because again as a chiropractor, I would ask key questions about people's health and with women around their menstrual cycle. And only up until a few years ago did I start actually considering that it was more than just when menses started and how many days it ran for, and also whether the quantity of blood was appropriate. It was really also the other time, the other period around that as well, in terms of ovulation. And this is a key thing that I think many people don't necessarily appreciate and is more subtle. I wish I would really love for you to kind of expand on that a little bit and perhaps talk about signs that ovulation is taking place or isn't taking
Yeah,
place, because I think that's something that will help women in particular understand how correct their cycle is at the moment.
absolutely. So I'll start with a few parameters of a healthy menstrual cycle. And like you said, it's much more than just the period, which is the 3 to 7 days you're bleeding. That's just the end of the show. The whole event, the whole menstrual cycle is anywhere from 25 to 36 days. That's a healthy range, 25 to 36 days. And we start from day one. When day one of our menstrual cycle is when we're bleeding, the first day of our period. And so it's actually the beginning of the show, I guess. Our sex hormones are at their lowest. We tend to be a little bit low on energy. And that's normal. That's okay. I think that's one thing that we need to realize, that as women, we're not expected to have the same productivity, energy levels, appetite every day of the month. And that's normal. That's okay. Um, and so as we gear up towards ovulation, our follicles begin to grow. And eventually, one of those follicles in our ovaries releases an egg. And that's ovulation. And leading up to ovulation, some of the signs that you'll notice in the body will be, some women even feel something called middle schmerz when they do ovulate. It's a little kind of sharp twinge in their left or right ovary. An hour or two is a normal scope of pain. If you're having a lot of ovulation pain outside of that, that's not normal. You'll notice your energy levels increase gearing up towards ovulation, your sex drive increase. You'll notice that you might notice some cervical fluid. Women have an increase of cervical fluid, and it's a fertile cervical fluid leading up to ovulation. Looks like an egg white, and it's stretchy in between the fingers. And that is a very good sign that you're about to ovulate. After you ovulate, that dries up and you won't see that anymore. And so ovulation has taken place. Your basal body temperature increases by 0.2 of a degree after ovulation. It remains elevated for the rest of your cycle. So your temperatures are running higher. Your metabolism is faster during the second half of your menstrual cycle. So after you ovulate around day 14, actually only I think it's about like 13% of women ovulate on day 14. So it's a fallacy that we all ovulate on day 14. It could be anywhere mid-cycle. Then after we ovulate, you're in what's known as the luteal phase. A hormone progesterone takes over, which is made by we make that every month after we ovulate. I think it's fascinating. We create our own endocrine gland in like 3 days. So the follicle that we release the egg from turns into an endocrine gland called the corpus luteum. Women are incredible, and it releases progesterone. It increases our body temperature, and it's a very calming and sedative hormone. Ideally, if we have it, if we're not ovulating, we don't get that. So women that aren't ovulating might have a lot of anxiety in the second half of their those last 2 weeks of their menstrual cycle. And that can also reflect in our practice too. You might feel a little bit slow moving, slower. Our stamina is not what it is in the first half of our menstrual cycle. So those first 2 weeks of our menstrual cycle, our stamina tends to be increased. And in the luteal phase, we can tire more easily, which could result in injury if you're pushing yourself too hard when your body isn't really at that capacity. And that's when injuries can happen. So a lot of subtle signs in the body. But ovulation is generally about mid-cycle, and if you are looking at those signs, you can usually pinpoint when it happened.
Okay. It's interesting you say that around injuries because there's studies in, for example, female soccer players, most injuries occur around ovulation, particularly
Yes,
in the
increase
study.
of estrogen. Yeah.
Yeah. So particularly with anterior cruciate ligament injuries,
Yep.
most happen around ovulation because it changes the strength of ligaments.
Yes.
So they'd be slightly weaker. So um, that's really important to understand for a yoga practitioner that during ovulation you could be more flexible because your ligaments actually changing
It's kind
their
of similar to when women are pregnant and they have more relaxin, and so they have their range of movement is increased. But if they don't have the strength to back that up, they can have an injury. And so that happens around ovulation for some women as well. They can notice, oh, wow, today leg behind the head feels so easy. But if you don't have the strength to support that, you could possibly hurt yourself.
definitely. So it really comes back to increasing your awareness through your practice and
Mhm.
listening to the rhythms of your body and understanding where you are in your cycle and what you need to nurture that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that direct line of communication with your body. Hmm.
Beautiful. So um, we have seen before, for example, again going back to athletes, and you said that, for example, that Ashtangis really are athletes. That the practice is very physical. It can still be deeply spiritual as well, of course, as I've
Hmm.
appreciated when I used to practice, and I'm sure you appreciate yourself. But it can push the body too hard. It can become a stress like any physical activity, and we see this in athletes that they can lose their menstrual cycle because it comes
Hmm.
the level of physical exercise becomes a stress, and any practice, any physical activity, including Ashtanga, can lead to those similar kind of effects. So what would you say to people around this, because it's so the practice itself, as you mentioned to begin with, that it's kind of because of you're doing the same thing each day, it becomes like this process. It can become slightly addictive in many ways. I witness myself becoming addicted to it, and I see many other people becoming addicted to it. And again, it's not the practice's fault. It's how we're interpreting what to do. So what would you say around that to, or what advice would you give that to, especially for women and women's health, and how to maintain a more consistent practice which is
Hmm.
balancing them rather than unbalancing them?
Absolutely. I first of all think it's imperative that every woman on the planet, menstruator on the planet, tracks their cycle and they know where they are in their menstrual cycle in any given day, because that will influence your nutritional needs. Like our metabolism increases by 10% in the second half of our menstrual cycle. We need about 200 more calories a day. So if we're not, that's just one small example. We um so if you don't know what day of the menstrual cycle you're on, you're never going to be able to have that awareness of why maybe you're more hungry one day or why you're a little bit more tired one day, or instead of fighting and pushing through the practice. So, if you don't know what day of the menstrual cycle you're on and you're a little bit more low on energy, and then but you're like, yeah, but this is my practice and it's 2 hours and I do this and I do this every day and that's it. And I'm just going to make myself do it. No pain, no gain. It might not be serving you on that day. I think one good way of looking at it is, how do you feel the rest of the day? Because if you feel drained for the rest of your day after your practice and you're struggling to show up in every other aspect of your life, then perhaps the practice was not serving you. And I know that's a big thing, when we're teaching and Sharat's looking for, and he teaches us to look for, when you're giving a new asana to someone, well, what are their energy levels at the end of their practice? Are they ready energetically, physically for a new asana? Um, so if the main event of your day is your practice in the morning, and then you're struggling the rest of your day, then something needs to be evaluated. So I'm betting a lot of people listening to this that maybe if they're not tracking their menstrual cycle, they might notice that, yeah, on some days we have the beautiful thing about this practice is that we realize that it's not the practices that changes, it's us. Every day we get on the mat because we're doing the same practice every day. We get that feedback. And that's a beautiful thing, whether it be mentally, whether it be what's going on in our life, emotionally. But as women, we have this other caveat to think about, and that's what is going on physically in the body, hormonally in the body, and how can we support our bodies in order to be practicing this practice until we're old in age and support our bodies instead of beating up our bodies. So, what I encourage people to do is track their cycles, know where they are. And if they feel super tired one day and really, really stiff, they might be looking at their chart and be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm on day 26 of my menstrual cycle. I'm going to be starting my period soon. Maybe today I should take it a little bit easier, take longer in my closing asanas, really nurture my parasympathetic nervous system, take longer counts in the closing asanas, and um, not push myself too hard. Maybe practice primary if you practice full intermediate, or tone it back, or just there are many ways. Especially I feel like we have this dogma that's like, okay, example, Maritasana D, we need to catch our wrist. Got to catch your wrist, or but if you're ovulating and you're feeling a little bit bloated because you're ovulating, which can be normal, well, maybe on that day, don't torture yourself and make yourself catch your wrist. Maybe just have a little bit of looser grip and give your body some space and your womb some space to do what it's doing. Um, because if you beat yourself up for too long and fight again, because I think there's that too, as Ashtanga yoga practitioners, a lot of us are type A personalities. And we also feel that like we have to do it every day, the same consistency, and sometimes it'll hurt, but it's leading to better good. And so I feel like the key of this practice is to understand and read the signs of your bodies and have that direct feedback if what you're doing is supporting yourself or not. And being able to kind of color outside the lines a little bit instead of just trying to fit into this box. Because I mean, this practice was an individual practice in the beginning. It was adapted from the teacher. It was adapted for the student. It wasn't the same practice for everyone. Um, and so I feel that, it's the same kind of structure, but it can be individually, you know, tweaked for each student depending on their needs, because everyone has different needs depending on their age, depending on their sex, depending on their health history. And so, yeah, just having a little bit of grace and compassion on your body, especially when it's doing, as women, these magnificent things behind the scenes for us. And just, I think by tracking your cycles every day, that's a great place to start.
That's great advice. Um, let's talk a little bit about nutrition. Let's talk a
Mhm.
little bit about perhaps you give me an idea, maybe the three worst foods for hormonal health. The three of your top
Mm,
foods that you would recommend most people to stop to improve their hormonal health.
okay. So one of which I can, because I don't like absolutes too much, and I'm more focused on adding in versus taking out. But one that I can definitely say without a doubt is not helping anyone on planet Earth, especially with our hormones as women, are industrial seed oils. And that's like canola oil, soybean oil, margarine, even plant-based butters for, people that don't want to eat butter because they're vegan. These plant-based butters are filled with these soybean oils, these omega-6 fatty acids, which are very inflammatory, and they create the production of a certain type of prostaglandin, the E2 prostaglandin, that causes, which is an inflammatory cytokine released in the body that causes cramping and inflammation. Um, and where inflammation is really the root of all disease, as far as I'm concerned. I'm sure you may agree with me. And so I just don't think those serve a place in our diet. Instead, focusing on these omega-3 anti-inflammatory fatty acids. So, um, olive oil is good. It's a monosaturated fat. Olive oil is great. Coconut oil is amazing. It's a saturated fat. Saturated fats have been villainized, but we need them They have cholesterol. Cholesterol is needed for the formation of all of our steroid hormones. Cholesterol is what, we need it for healthy membrane health, which is the covering of all of our cells in the body. We need cholesterol. Um, and so if we don't have any saturated fats, we are robbed of cholesterol. Not all cholesterol is bad. So I would say focusing more on olive oil, coconut oil, ghee, very important. Grass-fed butter. Obviously, this list is whatever dietary affiliation you're on. You just take what suits you and what doesn't ethically. And so those would be, really focusing on saturated, monosaturated fats and not the polyunsaturated fats, those PUFAs, which usually are in all restaurants are using those cheap because they're cheap for a reason. They're cheap, they're unhealthy, they are not stable in heat, they oxidize, they cause, you know, um, uh, you know, oxidative stress in the body and inflammation in the body. So I would definitely say swap those oils for a healthy oil, healthy fats, and make sure you're getting enough of them.
And do you normally tend to recommend an omega-3 supplement?
I do. Yeah, I do. Fish oil for those who, incorporate fish into their diet, or you can do an algae oil for omega 3s. Vitamin E oil is also excellent, especially for women for hormone formation. And so, vitamin E oil is a great one to take as well.
Okay. And what about the foods which are like the estrogen inhibitors?
Mm. So, there are a lot like soy, for instance, is a food that's and as far as phytoestrogens like soy or flaxseed, um, I think that the important thing with soy is that it's in moderation and it's fermented. Because if we're having a lot of soy, like soybean oil or these soy fillers and processed foods, they're generally genetically modified. They have a lot of pesticides that can cause imbalances in the body. Um, and but if you have a fermented organic soy, especially like tempeh or miso soup. Those can be very, there's a lot of research that shows that if you incorporate it or in moderation, it can lower levels of breast cancer. But also, if you eat too much, especially processed soy, it can be estrogenic and raise estrogen levels in the body. So I'm more towards with soy moderation. I sometimes do make more bio individualized um, recommendations based on my clients when I see their test and their health history and things like that. But I think advice that can be very general for everyone that can work for everyone is just in moderation. Don't eat soy, don't eat tofu every day, basically.
And what about recommendations around sleep and how that can affect the cycle?
Oh, this is such a big one. And this is, I think, one of the reasons too in Mysore we see so many women stop menstruating. We need enough sleep. We need at least 8 hours of sleep, 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Everyone's different, but really the time is important. So we need to balance our circadian rhythm. I honestly believe sleep and balancing your circadian rhythm is the most important thing anyone can do for their health. You could be eating the perfect diet, you can be taking all the supplements, but if you are not sleeping, if you're not rising with the sun, going to bed at a decent time, at least by 10 o'clock, and I know for most of us in this stronger world, that's like way too late anyway. So we don't need to worry about that. Most of us go to bed a lot earlier. Then you're disrupting your circadian rhythm if you're not doing that. And our circadian rhythm is really just the balance, that 24-hour balance between cortisol, which is our daytime hormone, and melatonin, which is our nighttime hormone. And they control so many processes in the body. So I think that does for some teachers, we really need to be adamant, especially as Ashtanga yoga teachers, if like, we're getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning when it's dark outside, we have to just be really adamant that we're getting 8 hours of sleep. Maybe use some red light therapy. I have an infrared, near infrared light, and getting that in the morning before going to the yoga shala when it's dark outside, doing like 10 to 15 minutes of exposure can help kind of regulate your circadian rhythm, because, you know, We are kind of like vampires, Ashtanga yoga practitioners and teachers sometimes, you know, like we wake up in the night and then we go to bed before not we're not like vampires, but sometimes, our sleeping schedule can be kind of erratic. So we just really need to make sure that we're getting sun exposure at, when the sun comes up and going to bed at a decent time and honoring that as best as we can.
Sure. So, one thing I wanted to ask you was just how you're, been practicing yoga for many years and Ashtanga for many years. How has your now, when you compare your practice to when you perhaps first started Ashtanga,
Mm,
it sounds from what you've told me, you've made the practice work for you and your needs rather than following this some dogmatic approach that you must
I
get
have.
4 a.m. and do every single posture every single day, and eat this way and that way. So it sounds like you've developed awareness and really understanding everybody and what it needs at this point in your life.
I have, I was kind of forced to. Um, I realized that what I was doing wasn't working and I was breaking. And so I could either just try to fight against it or I could maybe change some things. And first of all, I have to say, I don't teach anymore. After the death of my husband, I discontinued teaching. Um, and I developed a little bit more of a softness, I think, in listening to what my body needed. So that helped me. We all know if you're teaching, you're sacrificing, it's service, and we know that. So we're trading off. It's an act of service. Teaching is such an act of service. I have so much respect and love for all teachers, because they really are. eh, when you're teaching, you lose a little bit of your practice. You don't lose it; it's still there, but you can't go as deep in your practice because um, sometimes because it takes a lot on your body. But what I do now is it's very different. Yeah, I mean, when I first came to the practice, I was very rigid. I did everything Sharath said. I did everything the book said. I did everything to the T. I was so scared of thinking outside of the lines. Had to be this way, and I remember actually I started to kind of it was a workshop with Dina Kingsburg. I went to practice with her. It was the first time I didn't go to Mysore, actually. It was the first year I didn't go to Mysore, and because of the timing and stuff, it didn't work. And so I went actually to practice with Dina in India. And she really taught me that it's okay to think outside of the box, and just kind of sometimes it's really her I credit to kind of opening my mind that, it's okay to color outside of the lines. And, when you're thinking about a rule, why are you really following this rule? What is this? Who designed this rule? Where was it? What was the intention of this rule? Um, and so now I do, and especially because of my work, I cannot work it with women's hormones and not honor that. And knowing the hormonal ebb and flow we have, there's no way that I could not honor that. So yeah, like the week leading up to my period, as my energy levels are a little bit less and um, my stamina, I don't have as much stamina. I lessen my practice and frequency. Not frequency. I mean, every day I get on my mat, but I might just practice standing and closing one day and have a 30, 45-minute meditation a few days leading up to my period. It's not just the days I'm menstruating. Obviously, I take off the first 3 days of menstruation. I think that's absolutely imperative. And instead focus on other limbs of Ashtanga, pranayama without retention because we can't hold a bandhas when we're menstruating, chanting. What a beautiful, beautiful opportunity. I know from teaching and the few years that I taught, so many of those of our students would come in and they would make time to do their full practice. They would come in, they're all busy professionals. They're in Houston. Most of them are all busy professionals. And they would make time to do their full practice. But I would see so many people rushing through the closing sequences, not taking a 10-minute Shavasana. And in my opinion, my humble opinion, I was like, I would rather you shorten your practice and make time for a longer closing sequence and a proper shavasana or final rest for the nervous system. Because think about it, we have these people that's just like we're just in this rat race. We have these intense jobs, and then we're coming to practice, and we're so much in a sympathetic state. And so I notice that when I get closer to my menstrual cycle, especially those last few weeks, I prioritize more of things for the parasympathetic nervous system. Um, and it's a beautiful opportunity when you're menstruating as women to really get to focus on those other limbs, chanting and pranayama, because a lot of us don't really carve out that time because unfortunately we can't just live in a cave. That would be so great if we could and just live in a cave and just have like 10 hours a day for practice, but we have kids, we have jobs. So 1 or 2 hours might be all that we have in the morning if you're lucky. And so maybe exploring those other, as women, we can explore those other limbs around menstruation and even leading up to menstruation. So the old me would have been horrified when I first came to Ashtanga. Oh my gosh, you're only doing a 45-minute practice. You're just doing standing and closing. You're skipping all. But it's working really well for me, I have to say.
Good. I always remember going to David Swenson workshop many years ago, and him saying that the most important thing is just roll out your mat. And some days just standing on your mat and thinking about yoga is enough for that particular day. Maybe you stand, maybe do one sun
Mhm.
salutation, or maybe you lie down and do shavasana. But the fact that you've made that effort, that kind of commitment to your practice is really important. But it might change from day to day. And my teacher is the same, Sri O.P. Tiwari. He says it doesn't really matter, and this is around pranayama because that's his main thing that he teaches. It doesn't really matter how often and how much, but just if you're going to practice on Wednesdays for 10 minutes, have that commitment, make that commitment,
Mhm.
and stick to it. And really it's from that, see that consistency that your practice really evolves and develops. And just one other point, just around what you were saying around shavasana, because it's my experience as well. It's everyone's focus is on their asana practice or whatever practice they're doing, and then they forget shavasana. It's so important to, especially with an Ashtanga practice, which is quite physical. It's working the sympathetic nervous system, because it requires your energy levels to pick up, and circulation to be diverted to the muscles to maintain you through the practice. So to then get that balance with shavasana and allow the parasympathetic nervous system to
Mhm.
kick in and recharge the body. There was a wonderful experiment they did at Kalivadhamma, where my teacher is based, where they did a stress test on a group of people, just a treadmill test for about 3 miles an hour for about 10 minutes. And then they had one group sitting down, reading a magazine, another group just lying down with their eyes open, thinking, another group lying down and practicing Shavasana properly. And they found with all the other groups, apart from the Shavasana group, that their baseline levels hadn't returned to normal within 30 minutes. So their
Mhm.
respiratory rate was still elevated, their heart rate was still elevated, all their vitals hadn't returned to normal. Where with the Shavasana group, within 10 to 15 minutes, they had come to normal, but also then they dipped even lower. So their heart rate had now dipped lower. Their blood pressure was even
Mhm.
lower than before. So the rejuvenating effects of Shavasana, when practiced correctly, is really important. It's so nourishing for the system, and it's exactly what we need in the stressful world that
It
we
is.
now live.
Absolutely. And that's a fascinating study. And it's just so important. I like everyone gravitates towards the asana practice, and they love to be in that sympathetic state because I think most of us are kind of addicted to that stress sympathetic state anyway. And just so many people have that aversion of slowing down and really taking a little bit, longer in the closing asanas and final rest. Um, and really that's what we need. What's good for you doesn't always it doesn't always feel like it's good for you, basically. Sometimes we have an aversion to what we really need. And that's part of practice too, non-aversion, so non-attachment. So
Completely, completely. Jenna, thank you so much for taking time out and chatting with me today. You've given, I think, a lot of great information, great advice for especially female Ashtanga practitioners, which I think is going to really help a lot of people and also open their eyes to looking at themselves in a slightly different way.
thank you for having me on. I love talking about this. It's a pleasure. Um, so yeah, thank you, Rob.
Let's do it again soon.